Welcome, lacrosse fans and sports bettors alike, to another episode of Bet On Lacrosse. This is our first video episode in a while and kind of goes hand in hand with a relaunch of the brand. So I've started betonlacrosse.com. If you guys aren't aware, definitely go check that out. That's a new site that I started to kind of have all our content live there. So my articles are going to live there. Brian's betting reports are going to live there. So both NLL and PLL, which we'll talk about a little bit. And pretty much any other content you can find. Our podcast will live there as well. You can find this on YouTube. You can find this on wherever you get your podcast, Spotify, Apple, etc. But you can also listen to it on the website itself if you really feel so inclined. So a great site for a lot of different resources. I have some, how to bet on lacrosse articles as well. So some betting education content. So definitely check that out if you haven't already. But I'm joined today by Brian Andrews. We're going to talk NLL futures, NLL Week 1 picks. Touch on a little bit of the NCAA lacrosse futures that were released as well. We don't really have picks for that, but we will go down the list of, what's kind of out there, who's the favorite and all that stuff. But Brian, welcome aboard again, for another episode. How's it going, man?
Good. Happy to be back. Excited about the launch of the new website. It's a shame that we weren't able to be a little bit more consistent this year. It was a very crazy year, I know, for you and for me as well. So I'm looking forward to having a central place for all of our content to live.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And for people that have been following me for a little while, I was at Action Network. I'm no longer with them anymore, so I was writing articles for them on lacrosse as kind of like a side hustle within the company. Now I'm no longer with them. I wanted a place for my articles to live, so that's where you can find them all on betonlacrosse.com for the foreseeable future, as well as, like I said, a bunch of other content. I'm still using the Action app to track my plays, but a big difference in that is I would track my plays right when I bet them in the Action app, and then that would send out a notification to whoever follows me. Now I'm actually on Dub Club, so that's a new platform, relatively new platform, where handicappers can send out their plays in real time via text, via email, and via the Dub Club Plays app as well. So if you want to get my plays immediately when I bet them, that's going to be the go-to source. And right now it's free. I don't intend to charge for the foreseeable future. If I do start charging, which a lot of people do on Dub Club, it would really just be so that way you get them in real time. As we're going to mention, there's a few futures, a lot of them that I like that I sent out last night, and they moved very quickly. FanDuel is one of those books that tends to move their lines in reaction to when I bet them pretty quickly. ESPN Bet's another one, and then some other sports books are a little bit slower to react, but still have been moving odds. So that would be the real benefit and reason I would charge maybe in the future. But as of right now, 100% free, so no sweat. You can sign up for that. You'll get my plays immediately when I bet them, and then I'll still be tracking them on the Action app, and they'll still be in my articles, but that'll be at least 20 minutes after I send them out in the Dub Club Plays app. So, again, sign up for Dub Club if you feel so inclined. If you don't, no harm, no foul. You can listen to the podcast. You can still get the articles. I'll never put all my content behind a paywall. It'd really just be for the speed of getting those picks. It would be the only reason I would ever charge in the future. But as of right now, like I said, it's completely free and going to be that probably for a little while. So feel free to sign up. It's Dub Club. I'll put the link in this description so that way you can actually find it, but you could also search me on that platform as well. So Brian, let's start off with, I want to give some pub to the Bet on Lacrosse report. We got PLL and NLL. We actually now, we've been doing this so long. We have 5 seasons of data on the PLL and 3 seasons on the NLL going into the season. So, we have a lot of betting data at our disposal, and it's kind of nice to kind of look at on the trends. I'm actually working on a trends Excel sheet as well to kind of look at how teams do on short rest, how teams do, when playing each other back-to-back games, which we have a lot of those this year as well. So that'll be something we'll add. It will be separate from the Bet on Lacrosse report, but will be another resources that we'll be adding in the foreseeable future. But tell people a little bit about the NLL betting report and the PLL betting report for people that may not know what it is.
Yeah, so essentially what it is it's just a collection of data and visualizations about general trends. You can look at money line versus underdog. You can look at different spreads, different values of the spreads, and how teams have done covering those. Same thing for totals. And then we have various things that we break down by team individually, but also by matchup. So within a year or across multiple years, you can look at trends for any one of those given categories. And it's really matured over time, but also I am interested in increasing the number of visualizations or the things that the report can do. And I'm open to suggestions for things that people would want to see. So we should sit down and talk about how to include the short rest trend into the report,
Absolutely.
because that's something that we have harped on the show, especially in the NLL over time, as a really interesting indicator, especially for things like totals. And even though the books have caught on a little bit to us playing that by not posting lines too far in advance, it's still good information to have that is very actionable. And it's, looking back, it's actually kind of crazy that we have, 5 years of PLL data on there and 3 of NLL. So it's kind of like a cool project that's becoming really mature and I'm really happy with, and I want to continue working on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And shout out to Brian, too, for adding 2020 PLL season, because we started this in 2021. But I actually went back, kind of collected all like the spreads and stuff. And obviously it was very volatile back in 2020 during the championship series, and probably doesn't have as much value in including that. But that's the beauty of the report, is you can actually filter out that. But hey, if you want that, you can actually go back and look at all that as well. So it's kind of cool to see where these lines have come. We had some high totals during the championship series. Unders were king during that span. But the books have gotten a little bit better at setting those lines now.
That set of data is like almost like just there to be in a museum, because like you were saying, if everyone that listened to the show was doing this at that time, like, we all made a lot of money, because the books were handicapping games like they were 60 minutes long, no 2-point arc, or sorry, like they had a 2-point arc, but they were handicapping it like it was a 60-minute game, longer field. Like that's the only data they had to work with. And if I'm sure other people had the same reaction, my eyes bulged out of my head when I saw totals of like 29.5 for games of this length. So looking back on it, you won't find anything useful there, but it is a funny time capsule in lacrosse betting history for sure.
No, it definitely is. It's funny too. Like, we still haven't even gotten, even with the new rules and the PLL changes and stuff, we still haven't gotten close to 29.5 total, and never will. I mean, I think maybe the worst we had was like All-Star Game got higher than that, but that's the All-Star Game. So yeah, it's really funny. My favorite trend is not even from the championship series, but the 2021 season, that underdogs, not just against the spread, but straight up, were 22-20. So they were actually winning. Underdogs were winning more than they were losing during that season. So, and you were getting a little bit of plus money on those as well for the most part. So that's one of my favorite stats, and it's definitely, the books have gotten better now at knowing who should be favored and who should be the underdog. And there's still parity in the PLL as well, but they're a little bit more on top of it than they were back in those early days. But yeah, that's the cool part about looking at the reports. You can kind of see a lot of those stuff. Anything from the NLL season last year or in general that you kind of want to lead off with from the betting report?
One thing looking back that was shocking, that I don't think I really remembered in real time, is just how much unders hit last year. The books for NLL in particularly because of the volatility of the game, you only really see a majority of the time 23.5s and 22.5s. And that's just because, like, sometimes games explode. You do have games that go up to 40 goals. That's much more rare. But you also have games where both teams end up in the single digits. So because of that volatility, they kind of just stick to a middle ground of 23.5, 22.5. But last season, unders hit at 57.2%. So almost a 60% tilt over a long season like the NLL. There's a lot of opportunity to take advantage of the totals there, depending on the matchup. And FanDuel, we just talked about the books getting a little bit sharper over time. FanDuel is posting a bit more variety and team specific totals. They have at least 124.5. I saw they have more 23.5s and some 22.5s. On the flip side, DraftKings for this weekend's slate of games has almost entirely 22.5s. And for some games, we find that kind of inappropriate based on team makeups, especially off-season moves, which books still are kind of soft on. So I'm going to be looking particularly in the early season at what books are posting what totals, and maybe trying to take advantage of some low totals early on while the defenses are still trying to get some chemistry. Maybe some teams have some new goalies, or maybe some teams have some really stacked offenses that the books aren't accounting for yet. But we're going to talk about that later when we get to the NLL Week 1 lines.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we'll talk on futures. And like we said, books are getting better, but they're still not completely perfect. There's a sports book out there that still has Panther City in their future odds. So definitely make sure you don't bet that if you see that. I think every other book has gotten on board, but there's one in particular out there that I'm like, really? And they adjusted their odds recently too, so it wasn't even like they just kept their stale odds up there. They adjusted the odds, and for some reason, someone needs to tell them that there's 14 teams, not 15 teams this year. But I digress. We'll get into some more NLL, but first I kind of want to touch on the NCAA futures a little bit because they were released by DraftKings. Bet365 has some odds out there as well that are a little bit differing. So if you have both books, definitely shop before you place a bet. And I am anticipating more sports books. FanDuel is definitely going to be one of them that's going to post odds. They're going to probably post closer to January as the season gets closer. So I'm not betting any NCAA futures just yet. I feel like last year I kind of waited, and it was, there's a few that I bet preseason, and I will definitely do, bet some in the preseason still. But I think with college, it's so wide open that it's sometimes better to just wait and see. You'll miss out on a little bit of value potentially, but unless you see a really outlier line, I think it's always good to just wait, see what the schedule looks like, see what the rosters are. Last year Yale was a good example where they had two players that were out for season-ending injuries. So if you bet back in the fall, you were assuming that they were playing, and they ended up, they were out. So that's like a good example of why you should probably wait and see, how healthy teams are and what the schedule is like too. Because again, I'm very big on looking at the schedule. We're going to talk a little bit about that with the NLL too, but looking at the schedule and seeing where okay, if a team starts out with a brutal stretch, maybe don't bet their futures right off the bat. Wait a few games, anticipating that they might lose or, not look as good. And then if you still like them, that's when the time to bet. So, more information is always important. So if you don't mind, Brian, just run down the top teams based on the DraftKings future odds.
Yeah, these are, again, DraftKings odds. We got Notre Dame sitting at the top at plus 425. Not really a shock there. Then we have Syracuse at plus 550, which I think is very interesting. Then we have Virginia at plus 800. Huge jump there. Princeton at plus 900 and Cornell at plus 900. Then we have Maryland, Duke, and Johns Hopkins at plus 1,000. Yale at 1,600. Penn State 1,800. UNC, Georgetown, and Denver at plus 3,000. And anything past that is a little bit too long for the show, where we're not even really, like Hutton said, playing anything yet, or even recommended playing anything yet, because we don't have as much information as we would like at the present time.
Mm-hmm. And another point too, to just why to wait or why to just be very careful, is that fact that I still think the number is 13 teams, 12 or 13 teams have won a championship in college lacrosse. It's very chalky when it comes to the tournament. So, there's times where it's you might find some value. I mean, I'm the first to admit I bet Richmond last year at plus 8,000 because I thought they were a legitimately good team. But they didn't even make the tournament. So it's again, you might find some value down the board, but you really got to stop and ask yourself, hey, does this team have a chance to make it to the Final Four? Because even if there is value on them, it just gets very chalky, during the tournament. And, I think 19 total teams have even made it to a championship, let alone the 13 that have won. And we have seen some new ones come out of nowhere. Yale and Notre Dame most recently have won their first title. So that's not to say if a team has never won it, completely scratch them off your list, but definitely do your due diligence and know that some of these, mid-major schools are not going to probably make a tournament run. And the other thing is, too, you want to bet teams that are going to make the tournament and even have a chance. I think Notre Dame during the season where they were left out is kind of an outlier, them and Duke, but that's a good example of why even betting a team like that that early, they didn't even make the tournament. So you kind of want to make sure you get these tournament teams, get a team that you think is going to win their conference. That's kind of the way I look at it, is if you think they can win their conference or they have a tough enough schedule to get an at-large bid, that's where you can kind of, you set yourself up for the future, because then when the tournament comes, then you'll have some, hopefully some futures at longer odds than what you'd get if you waited until the tournament. So that's my recommendation for futures. Don't take the same approach I do with NLL and PLL, because there's way fewer teams. So I think it pays to just wait for right now. Moving on to the NLL though, I'm gonna just go through my power rankings. So I plan on I think I'm gonna do a weekly power rankings article on betonlacrosse.com, so you guys can keep a look on that. We'll see how my rankings go, but I'm gonna rank the teams based on, and this is what I kind of took into account. I didn't just list the teams that I think, from 1 to 14, how good they are. It definitely is a reflection of how good they are in my mind. But I took data from last year, based on like how these teams performed. I factored in starting goalie changes. So, even though Zach Higgins was on the wings last year, I have him factored into the Ottawa Black Bears data and stuff. So, that's an example of an adjustment I made. I took into account playoff data too. I feel like just looking at the regular season could skew some of the teams. The Bandits are a prime example. The Bandits ended up, going on a run, winning the championship. Their defense played phenomenal during the playoffs and even later in the season as well. But if I was to ignore that data, they probably would have been lower on my list than they probably should have been. So I took that into account, and then I made some manual adjustments based on roster additions and subtractions. So, Calgary Roughnecks are a good example of where I did based on, if it was a drastic change, I took away, 25 goals against, or added 25 goals against, depending on if it was offense or defense. Moderate 15 and minor was 5 goals. So it's based on, goals against, goals for. Obviously not perfect, but I also took into account last year's expected goals using Lax metrics, which unfortunately isn't going to be around this season. But shout out to Cooper Perkins and what he did with Lax metrics last year. And then the adjusted goals against average as well, which I mentioned, I switched goalies for certain teams. And then one player in particular who had a really down year last year, but I expect him to bounce back, is Dylan Ward. I actually used his 2023 stats for goals against adjusted. So those are the way I kind of built the model. So it's not like I, just rank these teams blindly and kind of, picked and choose where I put them. So some of these teams, their rankings, and they might move up, they might move down. But right now I have Toronto Rock number 1. I don't think we can discount how good they were last season. Again, they got to get past Buffalo. Maybe they don't, actually. Maybe, they get lucky. Maybe another Tom Schreiber team like the Archers can avoid their arch nemesis. But as we saw, the Archers were able to beat the Chaos this year. So, you never know. I'm really high on the Rock. We'll get to them a little bit later. Seals are in at number 2. I actually have Albany at number 3. And what's important to note, too, this is how I stack these teams. There's a few teams that are maybe a little bit lower, but actually have more favorable schedules. Rochester is one I'll kind of point to a little bit later. But Albany, I have them at 3. Then I have Buffalo. I know Buffalo fans are going to be like, why do I have the defending champs back-to-back at 4? I just think based on what I saw last year, I don't want to completely discount how they performed on defense. Matt Vince, came out of nowhere in the playoffs and looked like vintage Matt Vince. But, that defense did struggle a little bit last year. They lost a few pieces, not too major overhaul there. And then, of course, there's some additions as well to their offense. But overall, they're 4th. Can probably move them up, as we go along. And these will definitely adjust and stuff. But these are how I rate these teams, too. So I have an assigned rating to each of them based on all those factors I laid out. So I'm able to actually, go and see what I think the spread and what I think the money line odds should be, which will hopefully help me, as I continue to tweak this model going forward. But I have them at 4. I'm really high on the Rush. Number 5, they come in, and that's because a lot of their additions on offense. So they probably would have ranked a little bit lower, but I made some manual adjustments on offense and defense, which puts them, at 5th in my power rankings. Rochester I have at 6. So they're my 6th ranked team. I actually have them potentially finishing at as high as 4th in the standings, just based on their schedule. So we'll talk about them a little bit more. I really like their additions on defense, so that kind of gave them a little bit of a bump compared to last year. They had a great offense last year, but defense was a big weakness. Georgia Swarm 7, and then Colorado Mammoth 8. So those could potentially be your 8 playoff teams. Again, Mammoth, I'm thinking Dylan Ward, kind of bounces back from last year, and then I like you consider the addition of Will Malcolm and then the re-addition of Ryan Lee on offense. I think Colorado could be better this year. Vancouver's not far behind at 9, as is Halifax. So that's the other thing, too. These are rankings, but the margin between these teams is very thin. Like, I think I have Colorado at plus 10 in the goal differential, and then I have Vancouver like plus 7 and Halifax plus 4. So, like, the goal differential is very close for those teams. So those are some bubble teams. Black Bears I have at 11. Wings I have 12. Calgary I have at 13. And Vegas I have at 14. So those are my power rankings. Feel free to tweet at me what I got wrong. But based on what I laid out and how I calculated them, like it's not really, in my opinion, wrong the way I have it set up. So we'll see how much these teams have adjusted since last season. But that's how what I have them at going into the season. Any reactions to that, Brian? Any qualms you have with my rankings?
I don't really have many qualms. I think Halifax falling that low feels unlikely, but I don't even think it's going to matter because you talked a bunch about Buffalo being at 4, and I even think like last season that would have been an appropriate place to put them, but they just have this like clutch factor. They did make some good additions leading up to the playoffs last year, like Dawson, like good defensive acquisitions and they filled the voids they needed to fill in the right time to do it, to make the push to the championship again. But they just have this like weird clutch factor that these other teams do not seem to have, except for the Mammoth, which was like really odd. We'll talk about that a little bit more when we get into the futures. So I think the thing that I need to see, because I'm also very high on the Rock and I am high on the Seals, but those two teams and Halifax just can never seem to really just put Buffalo away. Even when they win, it's close. Buffalo is the only team that seems to be able to run away from all these people or all these other teams. And I think early in the season or midway through the season, we need to see some dominant performances against Buffalo to have me convinced that 4 this season is the correct place to put them. I know you did it based off of numbers and not off of opinion. I just think they have one of those that boy nice teams that comes out when they need it the most, because they have that attitude sometimes in a way that numbers can't always comprehend. And I do hope that some of these teams that are really stacked can show dominant performances against Buffalo this year.
Yeah, no, and I'm not as high on them maybe based on the schedule. That's not really actually calculated in these power rankings, so like I don't take into account schedule for this. That would be for my projections. I do project win total and stuff, so maybe I'm undervaluing them a little bit. I did account for, like, to me the Dawson addition is an addition, even though like he played for them last year. I gave him a bump in goals against, so I added I took away 5 goals against in their total, and then I took into account their playoff stats and stuff, and still when I shot out the numbers and stuff, that's kind of where I had them at. So but again, the margin is very thin between like them and Albany. Like it's essentially a pick 'em. Like I think it if I was to make the true odds based on how I have them rated, it'd probably be Buffalo, I think, like plus 106, and then Albany minus 106. So obviously, like, the sports books are going to probably make that a pick 'em at minus 110 on each side. So like, even though they're ranked 4th, it's like, again, the margin of error is like very close. Let me look at what they have those projected at their goal differential is. Let's see. Yeah. So listen. So this is how I have the projected goal differential. So this is how kind of like I rank the teams. I'll kind of go down the list. I have Toronto 43.7 positive. So maybe a little bit extreme there, but that's what I have their goal differential at. Not too far off from what they were last year though. San Diego plus 36.5, Albany plus 34.6, Buffalo plus 33.3. So Buffalo is like, one goal away from being in the third team on this list. They got Saskatchewan at 27, Rochester at 23, Georgia at 15, Colorado at plus 9, Vancouver plus 7, Halifax at plus 4, and then we got Ottawa at minus 10, Philadelphia at minus 12, Calgary at minus 18, and then Las Vegas at minus 33, based on, those projections and those adjustments and stuff. So it was a little bit more drastic, without making those adjustments. But, even like Las Vegas, they wouldn't be any more than, I think, a plus 185 underdog against Toronto. So that gives you an idea of like the margin between these teams is very small right now. That will, either increase or decrease as the season goes along. But I wanted to be a little bit more conservative with my model in this regard. So I didn't want it spitting out plus 350 underdogs when clearly, a team like Vegas could beat anybody on any given night. That's kind of
Oh
what
yeah.
we're looking at right now in terms of that peels back the curtain a little bit more on it. So don't just go off of the rankings 1 through 14. Also consider, how small it is between these teams. But let's go into our futures and kind of talk like, each tier of these teams. Like, let's hit on maybe the favorites that you really like, Brian, that you're betting in terms of people to win the championship.
Yeah, so right now my portfolio is really small. It's just Rock Seals, Bandits, and also Mammoth. Mammoth's kind of the flyer team. Mammoth just to find a way into the playoffs all the time, and in particular the year they won, I totally discounted their ability to even get into the playoffs. Back then there were the conferences, and I think that helped the Mammoth get there and win when they needed to win, and that's fine. I still think, especially with Ryan Lee coming back, I think Ward's going to have a bounce back year, like you were saying earlier. I think they have some pieces in place that will help them. And given how long their price is compared to some other teams that I don't think deserve the shorter price, like maybe, we can talk about Rochester a little bit, for example, or maybe the Swarm a little bit, for example. I just don't see a reason to not take the Mammoth at, plus 2,000 or longer. For the other three teams, the Rock Seals, Bandits, they're just typically the top three. I don't expect them to lose their first few games, and I expect their odds to get shorter really quickly. So I'm taking them at anything. At this point, if I were to take them right now, I would take them at anything plus 600 or greater. And then almost everything else is a wait and see for outright winning the championship pick. I'll have to see some like really good performances from, for example, the Swarm, or the Rush, for example, since they ended up super high on your power rankings. And I'm also bullish on them, but it's still not bullish enough for me to take even a flyer at plus 2,500 on them yet. So I'm keeping my portfolio small. I'm excited to see what happens in the first couple weeks of the season, and then I'm going to reevaluate from there.
Yeah, and I'm pretty similar to you. I mean, I have futures on both Rock Seals and Bandits as well. Yesterday I gave out Rock and Seals at their current prices. I bet Bandits at plus 700, and they're actually moved back up to plus 700 now on FanDuel in kind of reaction to people betting the Rocks and Seals after I suggested that. But I bet that before the schedule came out, and just the way the schedule shakes out, I'm just not ready to bet the Bandits right now. I think we're going to see a similar season as last year where they're going to maybe, just have a modest start, not do bad by any stretch of the imagination, but it's a tougher schedule to start. And then once March rolls around, like the rest of their schedule is pretty cake. And they're also like, unfortunately, like last year, I don't think they had any doubleheaders. This year, they're the only team with 2 doubleheaders weekends and playing fresh teams in both those weekends. Calgary's another one with 2 doubleheaders. But they play Las Vegas, who's also on short rest on one of those weekends. So that's just something to kind of like look out for. And I actually, I take that into consideration too when I'm doing these win total projections, which plan on doing an article on that. I don't think we're getting win total projections or win total odds on FanDuel like we did last year, unfortunately, which sucks because I'm ready to bet them. But you can bet them on CoolBet, and I will, post them no later than Friday. So that way, if you are looking to get some last second win total bets in, if they don't, I don't want to post them and then the sportsbooks see what I'm projecting. So I'm kind of waiting to see if they post them first, but we'll see what FanDuel ends up doing. But yeah, like I said, I gave out Rock and Seals yesterday. I still like them each at 600. And then Nighthawks are another one I like at plus 1,400. So like I said, they're my 6th ranked power rank team right now, but I have them finishing right now in the projected standings at 4th. And that's going to change, as teams win and lose. Like even after the first week, some teams' win percentage right now I have projected at 56% is going to jump up to 100 or go to 0 for that game. So that's going to affect their, win projection. But right now, based on their schedule, based on who they play some teams, 2 teams on short rest as themselves. I think they could finish as high as 4th. I like what they did on the defense too. They added a lot of key additions on defense, which was a real struggle for them. And Rylan Hartley being healthy, if he stays healthy, is going to make a big difference. I mean, you saw they lost, I think, 9-3 against Toronto last year. Obviously that offense did not do its job after having a phenomenal season, but Hartley stood on his head for most of that game, and they gave their best effort to Toronto. They just weren't able to get it done. So I think he's going to be a big bump for them as well. So they were 1,600 on ESPN Bet last night. They're now 1,400 on Bet365 is the longest you can get on them. But I think given their schedule, you might be able to wait because they do play Buffalo twice in the first 4 or 5 weeks of the season. So, feel free to wait. But I think they're good enough to hang with Buffalo is a reason why I think bet them now. But they're another one. And then I'm with you on Colorado, at plus 2,500. I think I'm not betting their playoff odds just because right now I do have them projected pretty close to making or missing the playoffs. But I think if they get in, they can make a run, as we've seen in the past. So that's why I like those long odds. And then the Rush, I'm very high on the Rush, as everyone can probably see. And maybe I'm too high on the Rush. We'll find out, in these first couple weeks how things go. But I really do think they could be last year's, this year's Albany and really surprise some people and make a run. And maybe they won't go all the way and win the championship or even go all the way and make the finals. But I think the prices are way too long on them. They were plus 3,000 on FanDuel last night. It's moved to 2,500 now. And we're recording this too on Tuesday. So if you're watching this on Wednesday, that's what we're referencing. But I do still like them at those odds. And, based on teams to make the playoffs, I think they're the most value on the board. They were at plus 190, at plus 172 on FanDuel. I think this team's going to make the playoffs. I think it's got the schedule shapes out that they can sneak in pretty easily. And then they're a team that I'm betting to make it. So they're the only team I'm betting. I'd suggest making it right now. I bet Toronto at minus 320, and now it's like minus 430, and went from like 75% probability to now like 85%. So I would probably just stay off and find better ways to tie up your money than that at this point. But, I'd be shocked if Toronto doesn't make it this year. So that's why I felt like the price was still good enough, even at that heavy juice. And then the three teams I have to miss. I know you're on Calgary as well with me. I have Halifax at plus 140. Again, I think it's a coin flip whether they make the playoffs this year. So getting odds better than a coin flip is why I suggest maybe a smaller unit play on that. I'm like a half unit. Ottawa at plus 126. I still like them to miss. I'm just not convinced that they, I think Zach Higgins is an upgrade in goaltending, but we saw, he didn't really change Philadelphia's trajectory too much because their defense wasn't that great. And I don't know if Ottawa's defense is going to be that great again this year. Like, they showed streaks of being good last year, but still too much inconsistency. So, tough to fade Jeff Teat based on the year he's been having this year, but I still am not too high on them. And then Calgary is the one that, even at minus 130, I got it at plus 126 when it first opened. I still like it at minus 130, or really, I'd say probably minus 150 or even worse than that. I just don't think this Calgary team will make it based on the loss of Del Bianco. And there's other key pieces. Cornwall is in Vancouver. Courier's now in San Diego. Simpson is in Las Vegas. They did acquire Dane Doby and Curtis Dixon. Those are big additions there, those two. I don't want to discount the additions of them, but the offense was very consistent last year, but it was also, they relied heavily on their defense. So even though now the offense might be a little bit more consistent with those two added to the lineup, I'm just not convinced that losing those transition threats and, the MVP goal 2 years ago is going to allow them to have success. So they're a team I'm betting to miss as well. Yeah, so those are my thoughts on championship futures and playoff futures. I sent those out via my Dub Club again, on Monday night. So again, if you guys want to get those before the odds move, they haven't moved drastically enough that I wouldn't still bet those. But if you want to get, a little bit more value, make sure you sign up for that. Brian, what are your kind of thoughts though on these playoff futures and stuff? Which ones do you have riding?
I'm completely with you on Calgary and Saskatchewan. Calgary, just they're crippled. And clearly the books were not privy to the negotiations with Del Bianco, plus all the pieces like Courier and Simpson, like you were saying, that they lost, that crippled the transition game that was such a strength when you can Del Bianco's outlet ability with those players. Opening at plus money is crazy, and is all the way down to minus 130, or it was down to minus 140 something at some point. It's just another example of the books not really having the pulse on the offseason and still being softer on these parts of the lacrosse market. And that in combination with the early weeks are what we really have to pay attention to, and especially these types of future markets. And the Rush is another example where they really shored up a lot of defensive pieces. Shilana's going to have a good year, I assume. They're also training a face-off guy who's typically a field guy, if I'm informed correctly, and they're training for the box game like many other teams have been doing over the past 5 years or so to great success. And I think that will free up a lot of their defenders like Messenger to actually play defense instead of having to deal with 30 ground ball battles at a game.
Hmm.
And for Rush to open up at 180 when Coolbet, who is arguably the book that's the most informed when it comes to this league, when Coolbet opens at a coin flip for the Rush to make or not make the playoffs at minus 115 either way, and FanDuel's opening with the Rush at plus 180, still at 172 to make the playoffs, that's something that we have to take advantage of as consumers. So paying attention to these offseason moves and comparing books are really where we're going to get our advantage.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. And like Brian said, like it's tough because you can't necessarily access Coolbet odds if you're in the U.S. like we are. It won't let you. It's geo walled. But if you are following them on social media like I do, you can see sometimes the odds. They'll post them. I also Pat Gregoire, who works there, does a great job of sending me the odds too if I ever ask him for that. And a good example, like you mentioned, the Rush is one that's an outlier. They had Buffalo and Toronto at minus 1,250 to make the playoffs, which is like I think a 92% implied probability or whatever. And I don't think it's that high. I think it's probably closer to maybe like 80, 85%. But that's a good example of where like even when the books had those guys at like around 75% implied probability, there's still some value there based on, again, it's always a little bit risky, because you never know. Like teams could get injured, they could have, someone could go down with an injury, and then you could really be in trouble, or teams just get better and stuff. But yeah, it's definitely definitely the sharper of the books is Coolbet. So if you are able to like look at their odds, it's a good way to compare. And if you can bet both Coolbet and FanDuel, then you're living large because there's probably some great opportunities to middle on both of those books, or to arbitrage bet, depending on what they have offered. So, but yeah, that's definitely a good point there. Any other thoughts on the playoff futures, or should we get into NLL Week 1?
I'm still super skeptical of the Thunderbirds not making the playoffs,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's going to be really interesting if that pans out,
Yeah,
just from a viewer perspective.
yeah, and I just think I'm not super down on them. I just don't think I didn't think they really did anything to improve, in this offseason. I think the defense, like, they got a lot of big name players. Obviously, Graham Hossack is phenomenal. I just think Warren Hill and that defensive unit has not really lived up to snuff, and they've struggled in transition defense. A lot of similar issues to what the Wings had. I mean, we went to that Wings Halifax game last year, and it was just shocking to me, like how many times I saw like Halifax players jogging kind of off the floor and them getting beat in transition. And then you could say the same about Philadelphia as well. But I do think Philadelphia at least has addressed that. I mean, well, like we didn't touch on Philadelphia that much, I guess, in the futures because there's a lot of unknowns for me. But they're a team that like going into the this off season, I was like, I don't really want anything to do with them. Like I'm not gonna touch them. Like new coach, but it's still kind of the same regime. You still got Paul Day at GM and stuff. I just didn't really want anything to do with him. Now looking at the roster though, Brennan O'Neill seems like he's picked up the box game pretty easily. You sign Callum Crawford, which kind of fills that void, of losing Ben McIntosh. And then other than that, like the offense hasn't suffered too many other losses. Bringing Phil Caputo from Panther City, but the defensive additions from Panther City, I mean, you pretty much took the Panther City defense, with the exception of maybe a few key players like Matt Hossack and Medeiros, and you put them on Philadelphia. I think they have 4 former transition / defenders from Panther City, and then Nick Daymood, their goalie last year as well. And not to forget Tracy Koleski, who's now your associate head coach, who was with the Wings prior to that, who obviously did a great job with Panther City. So like, Philadelphia is a team that I'm thinking might move up the ranks pretty quickly, depending on how they do. They have a tough game against San Diego to open the season, but like, they're a team that I'm not really ready to completely buy in on this year yet. That could change, but looking at what the additions they made, I'm not ready to fade them either. I very critical of the defense in front of Higgins last year and their transition defense. They brought in the pieces to kind of to fix that. Tony Malcolm's going to be a stud. Scott Dominey, who I had last year, actually helped improve a little bit, and then there's a handful of other guys again from Panther City that I think are going to make this defense better. So we'll see. See how things goes. I think it's going to take them a little while to adjust, as we'll get into. So that's a good segue, I guess, though, into NLL Week One best bets. You have a bet in the Wings Seals game. Talk to me about what it is and why you like it.
Yeah, so looking forward to Wings Seals. I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I'm also very skeptical still of the Wings, and I'm a Wings homer, so keep that in mind. Um, I am laughing internally at you, like mentioning the fact that the Wings were out transitioning another team last year
Yeah,
at
I know,
all.
right?
Yeah, and I agree, Domini's like been an essential pickup for that. It'll be interesting to see how Damoud fills into that role because I never really thought of Panther City as a transition team.
Mhm.
And Higgins, I thought, did enable it a little bit. I just thought the Wings, the rest of the team's makeup never really facilitated transition. I think Dominic helped with that. Matisse also helped, but he got pushed to the front. We don't have to go too deep into last year's rabbit hole. It doesn't really matter a whole much for this discussion. Um, but looking forward to this game, based on the moves that were made in the offseason for both teams, I'm looking at the total. So earlier I referenced the fact that unders did really well last year, and we're kind of seeing a couple books post totals that are a full point lower. And I think this is a game where we could potentially take advantage of that. The over set at 22.5 on DraftKings, but 23.5 on FanDuel, for example. So I'm going to take the over 22.5 on DraftKings. I think a lot of the offensive additions to the Wings are going to make them a more dynamic team. And at the same time, I still think, even though they got a lot of depth from Panther City, I still think they have a lot of the same issues defensively that they had anyway. That if Wings goalie, Wings former goalie, why can't I think of his
Oh,
name?
Zach Higgins, yeah.
Thank you. If Higgins couldn't fill that void or make up for the defensive shortcomings, I don't think Damoud's going to either or not. I don't want to discount Deacon Knott's ability to start in cage either. I don't think either one of them are going to be able to single-handedly make up for the deficiencies that I don't think that they've fully addressed. And I think one of the major things that they're still missing is that big shutdown defender like a Hasek or a Messenger or like just some kind of bully.
Hmm.
I think their weakness lies in one transition, but that's kind of the fault of their offense in some ways. And two, not having a good shutdown defender. And I noticed a lot of teams last year succeeding in isolated dodges in the indoor game, which I think is fascinating against the Wings.
Hmm.
So, given the transition makeup of the Seals and their high powered offense and the offensive additions that the Wings made in the offseason, I think I think this has a decent chance to get into a high scoring game. Not to mention it's early season, so that means the defenses and the goalies have to get their chemistry together.
Hmm.
It's still lacrosse. There's not a full training camp. These aren't full-time jobs. Defense is really hard in the early season for these teams. And I think these offenses have the opportunity, and transition units have the opportunity to take advantage of this. So I'm taking Wing Seals over 22.5 at DraftKings, which is minus 125 right now, but that's quickly changing. FanDuel also had 22.5 at minus 122. That's moved to a 23.5.
Hmm.
So I wouldn't take over at 23.5. I am taking over at 22.5.
Yeah, no, and I don't want to get too much into like key numbers with lacrosse, but with so many times we see overtime games, that 23 and a half, 22 and a half difference can be big. If you're playing it over, obviously if this game's 11-11 and goes into overtime and finish 12-11, Brian's winning his bet. If you took 23 and a half, you're losing your bet. So yeah, I agree with you. I don't know if I'm gonna bet this total or not. I'm still always a little bit hesitant to play totals to start. I mean, obviously there's some value to be played too when the sports books don't know, but sometimes I don't know either. So I do think that Seals offense, though, even losing Dixon and Dobie, like they got McIntosh, who's probably gonna want some revenge in this game. Rob Hellier from Las Vegas, and then Ryan Benesh are three key additions to kind of fill the losses of Stotts, Dixon, and Dobie. So the Seals are going to look a lot different on offense, but that doesn't mean the firepower is not going to still be there. And yeah, we'll see how Origlieri and this defense do. Like I don't think you mentioned either the Seals defense is a little bit banged up. Like Cam Holden might not play in this opening game. Patrick Shumay, I think, is still on the IR after suffering a ACL injury during Archer's training camp. So like, yeah, they're missing some pieces here, and the Wings played Toronto pretty well. A tough Toronto defense in the preseason. Again, I try to not like put too much stock in preseason, but Brian O'Neill can score. Like he's not, the learning curve doesn't seem to be that great for him, which is big what you want out of your number one pick. Like picking a guy like as good as Brennan O'Neill is with no box experience, first overall, is a dice roll, and it looks like so far he's been playing really, really well and is going to be able to step in pretty seamlessly. I mean, we saw Matt Rambo play really, really well pretty early on too when he joined the Wings, and Brennan O'Neill is, X that as a prospect. So I think the in addition of Crawford should help as well. So we'll see how things mesh, but I think both offenses definitely have the firepower to make this high scoring. I'm going to go with an over as well. I know I just mentioned that I'm not too crazy about playing totals to start the season. So I have two best bets. I'll start with Las Vegas, Rochester, over 22.5. This Rochester offense last year was money on the over, because partially was because their defense wasn't very good. Now I think the defense is going to be better, so I don't think we can maybe blindly play overs as much on Rochester games this season, based on the defensive additions that they added. But I do think, again, it's going to take some time to mesh. Same kind of thought process you had with Seals Wings, I'm kind of having with Rochester and Las Vegas. So Rochester obviously added some key pieces on defense, but it might take a little bit while for them to gel. Hartley, hopefully being fully healthy should help, but again, we'll see how he plays in the season opener. So I think this is more of a bet, though, on Rochester's offense that didn't really lose anybody, to come out high scoring against the Las Vegas defense that really isn't that great, and kind of got worse too at the end of last season. Like trading John Wagner was a smart move, just the fact that you could get some draft capital back. But we saw how well he played with Albany, and he was one of their best defenders or whatever. So, they still have some good defenders on that team, but, I'm still not convinced whether Landon Kells is the guy in net. Still a little bit too shaky. He's had some good performances, but then had some bad performances too. So to me, this is setting up to be an over here at 22.5. I think the total is a little bit too low. So I like this one to go over at minus 120 on Caesars, is where you can get that. So that's my first one. I think you're on the same page as this too, Brian. Correct me if I'm wrong. I also like the Toronto Rock to cover the 1.5 point spread. So again, very high on the Rock. I know TD Ierlan's injury is definitely that sucks. I think though, like if there was to ever be a position to kind of get an injury, like face-off is probably the one you can overcome the most. Again, that's not to discount TD, because TD is more than a face-off guy. He is a very good transition player in the NLL, and his defense has improved drastically since he joined the league. So I don't want to discount his ability to get them possessions and his ability to stop transition as well, on the other side of the floor. But I do think Toronto is going to be fine, in the interim, and I do like them to come out with a win to open the season as well. So I'm betting them, to cover the minus 1.5.
I agree with you. I'm also on this play, and I do think that losing your faceoff guy does have a tangible effect on the way you have to play the game. Obviously, you basically have to make the faceoffs a 50-50 ball and just try to break up clean wins from the opposing faceoff guy. But to do that, you have to expend so much extra effort. Your guys have to collapse from the lines. They have to prevent fast breaks. Whoever they're sending out on the faceoff is probably a defenseman. He's going to lose a lot of the time and then have to play defense tired. But I think these teams can adjust and use game plan to their advantage to, lean on Nick Rose a little bit, lean on the defense, lean on their transition unit a little bit. So I think minus 1.5 is a little too low for the makeup of this team, even with the Erlin injury. So I agree with you. I think this one's pretty straightforward. So hopefully we get an early win for the first game of the season.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And they are actually, I think, 2.5 on Caesar. So like there's a wide range of lines for this game in particular. And again, not to discount Ottawa. Obviously, you got Jeff Teat on the other side, but I'm just not convinced that they're going to be able to stop this Rock offense. They struggled against them last year. Even adding Zach Higgins, I don't know if that's going to make too big of a difference. It should help, but Toronto's kind of had Philly's number as well, and again, like different teams, different places, so it's like you can't kind of say 1-to-1. But Toronto's done well both against this Ottawa team and Zach Higgins, so I'm gonna take it at the low juice of -115 in my opinion, and bet them to cover the 1.5 point spread in this one. Let's go to extra money opportunities, EMOs. I don't think you have one, Brian, but I have one. So we'll just end off with a bang here, and I like the Rush to potentially win outright against Albany. I think this price is just way too long. It actually was +160, and now it's +155. I think it's the longest you can get at Caesars. So that's my plus money play. I think they can win against Albany. They almost beat Albany last year. So I think they're going to give them a good game. It'll be a close game. A little risky knowing the fact that the Rush do have a bunch of new pieces, on offense, and particularly rookies. But I think Brock Haley and Levi Anderson are going to, step in and be just fine in this league. And I think the addition of Shanks is very underrated. I mean, that's kind of why, too. I'm a little bit down on Halifax. Them losing Banesh and Shanks is, I think, big losses on offense. And they, we'll see how they kind of make up for those. But I'd say, maybe do a half unit on Rush money line and then a half unit on the +1.5, which is also +105. So you're still getting plus money on the +1.5 as well. If you want to be a little bit more conservative, I think I'm going to probably do a unit on both, to be honest. But smarter play is probably to split your unit in half and give yourself a chance to either win the outright or cover the spread. But I like them to give Albany a good game. I think Albany, is going to be good this year, but I think the Rush could spoil their season opener. So that's
I'm really excited to see Levi Anderson play.
So am I. And
like, if all the people who watch field end up tuning into this game, if his swim dodge annoys you in field, I can't wait for it to happen in box. Like, it's going to be even more egregious in the box game.
Yeah, there's already been plenty of highlights of him swimming his own teammates and stuff. So him and Haley, I think, are some big additions to this offense that was very good last year, actually. And I think that's the other thing. Like, I obviously manually adjusted the Rush to kind of increase. I gave them, I believe, 15 plus more goals for, and then tweaked the defense a little bit too. I think with the addition of Hasek, coming back to Saskatchewan, but this team was +7 goal differential last year at 8 and 10. Like, they had a positive goal differential at 8 and 10 last year. So this team was very close to making the playoffs, and probably could have made some noise potentially. I don't know if they would have gone all the way, but then they've gotten better this offseason. I think they gave Albany a good game. So yeah, I like them. And on the flip side, I'm also equally excited to see number one overall pick in the 2023 draft, Dyson Williams, on Albany's side. So a lot of rookies in this one. It should be fun to see the future of the NLL kind of in action on Albany with a young squad. Obviously, you had Ty Kurtz and Alex Simmons last year. Could have been probably co-rookie of the year if Simmons wasn't so elite last year. I mean, Simmons literally had a decent chance at MVP candidacy before, kind of tapered off a little bit towards the end. But these young guns on Albany are also really good. But yeah, I like the price there. I like the number. I'd probably make the Rush closer to +120 on the money line. So you're getting some good value, I think, at this number. But that's going to wrap it up for this edition of Bet on Lacrosse. We're glad to be back. Hopefully going to do this pretty often. I don't know if we can commit to weekly like we've done in the past, but hopefully do this a lot more frequently than we have recently. So I appreciate you joining me, Brian, and best of luck with your wagers this weekend.
You too. Good to be back.